Have you ever wondered how we went from this to this? The history of the Centerfire cartridge, coming up on this episode of Ron Spomer Outdoors. Well, there's a big jump from the little 22 short of the 1850s to the 300 PRC of 2024. But how did we get there? Well, in 7 major steps, and we're going to cover them all. Number 1, loose powder to the self-contained cartridge. This was a big deal. If you've ever muzzle loaded, you know the hassle of pouring powder into your muzzle, blowing it in the wind, getting it wet, finding a little cap, putting it on the nipple, cleaning out the bore because, what a mess. We had to come up with a convenient way to put all that stuff into one place, and that is how we came up with the self-contained cartridge. Tiny though it was, the Smith & Wesson developed 22 short was the first one in the US of A. It started actually back in France with someone called Flaubert, who took a musket cap, put a BB on top of it, and made a little parlor gun for shooting targets that used only the primer to send that ball down the barrel. Well, Smith & Wesson took that idea, added a little bit of length to the copper, and put a little bullet on top of it and called it 22 short, and we were on our way. And the 22 short soon became the 32 and the 35 and the 40s and the 50s. They got clear up to 75 calibers with these initial Rimfire cartridges. But that brings us up to the second big and important step. Number 2. Converting from rimfire to centerfire. A rimfire cartridge, as exemplified by the 22 long rifle today, uses a rim that extends beyond the diameter of the cartridge itself. And that is to both stop it and use it for head spacing so it doesn't get shoved too far into the chamber of the barrel, but also to hold the primer. The primer is spun into the edges of that rim, so when the firing pin strikes it at any point around that circle, it ignites it. The problem is, it has to be soft enough to squeeze when the firing pin hits. And that means with too much gas pressure inside, it could explode and kick gas back into the shooter's face. The big step we had to make was the Centerfire cartridge. And that happened in 1873 with a couple of famous rounds. The 4440 from Winchester, and that was in the lever action 1873 Winchester rifle. Meanwhile, the government put it in the 4570. And that cartridge to this day is popular and powerful. Our first Centerfires that made a big difference that continues to this day. Step number 3, black powder to smokeless powder. This was a big one. Black powder was wonderful for igniting cartridges for hundreds of years, but it was dirty. If you've ever shot a muzzleloader, you know when you've shot 3 shots or so, it gets pretty hard to ram a bullet down that barrel that's all full of soot. And then there's all that smoke obscuring your target. How can you improve on that? You've got to get rid of all that smoke and all that built up carbon. You needed smokeless powder. And smokeless powder was invented by, you guessed it, a Frenchman. And this time he came up with powder B in the 1880s, probably 1882. Nitrocellulose and a little bit of nitroglycerin, nice little mixture. It was a military secret. They put it in the French Lebel cartridge and tried to prevent the Germans from figuring it out. And that was in 1886. By 1888, the Germans had the 8x57 Mauser. Pretty soon, every country in Europe was using smokeless powder and making new cartridges go really fast. Why? Because smokeless powder was 3 times more powerful than an equivalent amount of black powder. No more smoke, faster powder, leading to the next big step. Number 4, straight wall to bottleneck. Straight wall cartridges were the norm because you wanted to maximize the powder capacity. You didn't want to shrink anything down. But when you got smokeless powder's efficiency, you could afford to neck that cartridge down and push a small bullet down a small bore, and very fast. And that was the big change. All that power meant that a light bullet could be driven so fast that it would hit as hard as a much, much heavier bullet. So you had lighter recoil, less fouling of the barrels, more power, and flatter trajectory. It was a win-win-win. Number 5, blunt nose bullets to spire point. Once we had the velocity, we needed to keep it in our bullets. And the way you do that, of course, is to get rid of that air shoving flat nose, round nose bullet and go to a sleek, racy profile with a spire point. Again, the French came up with it. The Germans were right on their heels, and they had spire points and Spitzers, as the Germans called them. And we were way behind the curve. The U.S. was still shooting round nose. Winchester came out with the 30-30 in 1895. That was our first commercial sporting cartridge using smokeless powder, and that pushed the velocities up significantly. But we were still using these flat-nosed and round-nosed bullets. Why? Part of the reason was the tubular magazines in our popular lever-action rifles. They thought it was too dangerous to put a sharply tipped bullet behind the primers in those tubular magazines. But the military was doing it even with bolt actions. About that same time, the 1893 or so, the U.S. military came up with the 30-40 Krag cartridge for the Norwegian 30-40 Krag bolt-action rifle, and that became the new military standard for a few years. But they were using round-nose bullets too, and they were 220 grains, which was way too heavy for the powder supply. And we figured that out when we went to war with Spain in Cuba. Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders and all of the rest of the American troops over there were under withering fire from a new cartridge and rifle that the Spaniards were using, the 757 Mauser. Bolt-action rifle, vertical stack magazine, sharply pointed bullets, you name it, they had the advantage. And Roosevelt figured it out, and he went back, and the government got to work on a new military cartridge for us that eventually became the 30-06. And this was a big development. Now we also had a straight-walled cartridge with a bottleneck shoving a pretty narrow bullet down a bore that didn't get fouled up by black powder, but we again stuck a 220 grain bullet on top of it, round nosed. They say that there were so many bullets left over from the 30-40 Krag that they wanted to use them up for efficiency, but they figured out it's just way too slow. So inside of 3 years, they modified that 303 cartridge by shortening the neck just a smidgen, 0.046 inches of the neck was cut off, and then they stuck a 150 grain spire point bullet on it and called it the .06 because it came out in 30-06. That was the new military standard. The combination of the 30-06 and the 30-30 Winchester made the 30 all-American. Every all-American cartridge was considered to be a 30-30. That was a deer hunting standard. It soon became the elk hunting standard. And to this day, the 30 is considered an all-American cartridge. Most of the European cartridges developed around the 8mm, 7mm, and 6.5mm. Of course, these days, a lot of those are coming into this country. But these were the standards early in the 20th century. Step number 6, increased velocity. We had the powder, we had the bullets, we had the primers and the self-contained cartridges. We just needed to make them go faster, or at least some hunters thought we did. So what Roy Weatherby did in the 1940s was he took the 375 H&H belted Magnum, which was a larger diameter case than the 30-06. He shortened it down so it would fit in 30-06 length actions. Sometimes he left them in full-length Magnum actions, but the key was that he maximized powder capacity for that belted case, and he drove his bullets really, really fast with high pressures, 65,000 PSI of pressure. And he sold that with the belt. The belt was needed to contain all those pressures, except for it didn't really. The 270 Winchester was doing the same 65,000 PSI without a belt, but it was a good sales pitch. And throughout the middle of the 20th century, we all thought that a belt was needed on a Magnum to handle all that pressure. Well, Roy's idea spilled over pretty quickly, and out comes in 1962 the Remington 7mm Magnum, followed in 63 by the Winchester 300 Magnum, and we were off to the races. Bigger cases, more powder capacity, pushing your bullets faster. That was the solution. But There was a step in the other direction at the same time, and that was the short actions. Winchester started it with a 308 Winchester in 1952, an offshoot of a government program to develop a more efficient cartridge for the military. And it was obviously a lot shorter, but it shot the same 30 caliber bullets. Didn't take off like a rocket right away, but eventually it gathered steam as hunters began to figure out it was nice to have a shorter, lighter rifle that would cycle more quickly, and it was not recoiling as much as the big 30-06s, and certainly not as much as those big belted magnums. Became pretty popular, got necked up and down, 243 Winchester, 7mm 08 Remington, on and on it went. What else could we possibly do? Remington came up with a pretty cool idea in 1966. They went with the short action and combined it with the belted magnum for more power and more powder. They called it the 6.5 Remington Magnum, and a larger version was the 350 Remington Magnum. Neither one of those exactly took off, mostly because they chambered those in rifles with short barrels, 18.5 to 20 inches. You couldn't realize the full potential of all that powder. And there was a lot of muzzle blasts and probably quite a bit of recoil. So the short, fat Magnum, even that idea started in the 1960s. It never really took off until it was revisited in the early 21st century, when we were getting pretty close to perfecting the 21st century cartridge. Step number 7. Higher velocity. Yeah, even higher than the belted magnums. We wanted to push our bullets as fast as we possibly could, but also be efficient doing it. And that's why Winchester came up with its WSM cartridges. Winchester short magnums, a short, fat case with no belt. They went with the 404 British cartridge, and it was way fat, like 0.550 inch diameter in the body. Shortened it down to fit in the 30-06 length actions, and they were able to just about match the performance of the standard 300 Winchester Magnum, 7 Rem mag, 270 Weatherby mag. Wow, what an innovation. Short, light, fast rifles, but they were missing that final ingredient, the high ballistics coefficient bullets. And here's an example of how that happened. In the late 1990s, around 98 or 99, Remington decided to really maximize performance by taking that 404 fat cartridge case and putting narrower bullets atop of it, keeping the full magnum length. The 30-06 maximum length is 3.34 inches. The full-length magnums, like the 375 H&H, stretches that out to 3.6. It's just that there are a lot of rifles that can't handle that long of a cartridge. Remington wasn't worried about that. They had modified their Model 700s a little bit to handle that length and decided they are going to have the fastest magnums in the world. So they went with the Ultra Magnums, a 300 Ultra Mag, the 7mm Ultra Mag, the 338 Ultra Mag. They were really rocking it. But man, is that a big, heavy rifle? Is it a long stroke? And it has some recoil. Winchester had a similar idea, but they went short. And here came the return to the 1966 short, fat magnums, the 300, the 270, and the 7mm WSMs. Now, these cartridges had everything but a high BC bullet. That's where they made their mistake. And you can see what a small change that was needed to actually get there in the 6.8 Winchester, which is merely the 270 WSM neck down, or with the shoulder pushed back just slightly, and then a longer, sleeker bullet mounted in it and chambered in a fast twist rifle barrel. That is the key for bullet cartridge performance in the 21st century. That's where we've gone from the little Rimfire 22 short all the way up to the 300 PRC. We've improved all of these ingredients until we've now got what we consider optimum for this day and age. So what we see here is the neck full caliber length so that it holds the bullet tight and straight so it doesn't tip or wobble for increased accuracy. And the reason that the WSM cartridges and the Remington version called SAUM, short action ultra mags, the reason that they were not set up for these long, sleek, high BC bullets was because at that time, we really didn't have a way to take advantage of those high BC bullets. What I mean by that is we didn't have laser rangefinders. That was a huge change. The first one for hunters came out in 1999 from Leica. And it took us a few years to figure out what advantages that was giving us. At first it was, okay, I know the distance to the target. I know with my 300 Win Mag, I have to hold this high at this range. Wait a minute, isn't there an easier way? And of course, there was. One of them was dial turrets on your scope. The other was ballistic reticle lines in your scope. And that enabled you to select the proper aiming point with these cartridges that could throw bullets a long way with enough energy to do the job when they got there. Well, when that started happening, we just needed to improve the flight characteristics of those bullets so that they could get there more easily and deflect less in the wind. That was the big challenge. It's easy to remember what your drops are, but the wind, man, that changes everything. And a little bit of wind change at distance can make a huge difference in where that bullet lands. 2007, up steps the 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, people like to sniff at this little thing, but this was a huge development because what Hornady did was they tried to maximize the use of a high-efficiency bullet with a small, high-efficiency cartridge case. They weren't burning very much powder. They were pushing a high BC sleek bullet that resisted wind deflection, and they were able then to provide a cartridge for target shooters to shoot again and again and again without wearing out their barrels. They didn't burn the throats out because they weren't having that much powder burning behind them. But the bullets were so darned efficient, they made up for that. And pretty soon hunters started grabbing onto that and realizing they could use a little more velocity. And then came the 6.5 PRC. As you can see, it's just a fatter case. It still fits into short action, but it drives that bullet about 200 feet per second faster, and that's just about ideal. And that sort of has set the standard now for what I consider to be the style for 21st century cartridges. You've got a good straight wall on your cases. They can be short, fitting your short action. They can be standard length to fit the 30-06 length actions. They can be full magnum length like this 300 PRC. But what they all have in common is a full diameter neck or slightly longer so that it really holds the bullet straight and tight. And then enough room in the chamber and the magazine to handle those long, high BC bullets. That increases their aerodynamic efficiency. They shoot further before they drop. They drift less in the wind, and they retain more energy downrange than the blunt-nosed bullets ever could dream of. So that is the sort of the face of the 21st century cartridge. And I think that's where we're going to go with all our new cartridge development. Not that I think we need much more, because we've already got these efficient cartridges in 22, in 24, in probably need a 25. We got the 26s in spades. We've got the 7s and the 30s and the 338s. I don't think we need a heck of a lot more than that. So whether you have old grandpa's rifle or great grandpa's rifle or great great grandpa's rifle or a all new modern rifle, the key is to understand it and its performance, its trajectory, the value of a certain shape of bullet, but mostly you have to be a hunter first. Don't get all sucked up into this technology and rifle and think, if I get a certain cartridge and bullet and scope, I'm going to be the world's greatest hunter from any distance. You have to first be a great hunter, then tie it into being an effective marksman, a good rifleman. The two together will make you absolutely deadly. So regardless which cartridge you choose, understand how they all work and how we got from the 22 short to the 300 PRC, and you will be a regular ballistic historian. And now, it's the tip of the week. And the tip for this week, how to cure a flinch. Have your buddy load your rifle behind your back. Maybe he does it, maybe he doesn't. He hands it to you unloaded. You think it's loaded. You think you're going to get a big whack to the shoulder, so you flinch. Have your phone camera set up. Record this in video. Get one from either side or both sides if you can. And what you're going to see is when you squeeze that trigger, you're probably more likely to jerk that trigger. You're going to move forward or lift your head off the stock, close your eyes, slap the trigger. It's all recorded for proof that you did it. You flinched and you would have missed your target. Have your buddy do it again and again and again until you're no longer flinching. You're just concentrating on your target, your sight picture. You squeeze the trigger, click, the gun doesn't move. You see the crosshair stayed on your target. You know you would have made that shot. Now he puts the live round in and you're shooting. Bingo. You don't feel the recoil. You realize you were afraid of nothing and you begin to cure your flinch. So regardless which cartridge, which rifle, which bullet you shoot, do be a good hunter. Do be an honest hunter. Always hunt honest and shoot straight.